and welcome to Integrated. This is the podcast where we seek to bridge the gap between the intellect and the will by examining the world around us and coming to terms with our nature so that we can become better disciples of Christ. My name is Angela Erickson and I'm your host. Thank you for tuning in to this episode. It's going to be a good one. I would know, I just recorded it. And I had the chance to interview my friend Josh Brahm, who runs the Equal Rights Institute. So this is the episode where we're going to talk about pro-life apologetics, more in particular like relational apologetics, how to be an effective apologist for the pro-life position. I really wanted to do this with Roe versus Wade kind of hanging in the balance right now. We'll see if the day that this is published, if they publish the opinion on it and their decision. I'm kind of guessing that it will come next week. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think this is really important. If you didn't get a chance to listen to the other two episodes I have about pro-life stuff, I was kind of hoping to do this as a 3-part series that would just kind of be published boom, boom, boom. But unfortunately, due to illness and some scheduling issues, that didn't happen. So there's a little bit of a gap. However, this was really a great interview. He's just so knowledgeable. Obviously, the thing about the Equal Rights Institute, like this is what they do. They study apologetics. They try out kind of what they're thinking out on college campuses and in public spaces so that they can kind of get an idea of what's working, what's not. They think a lot about philosophy and all of those things. And they do a really good job of putting it together in a way that's understandable and relatable and teaching other people how to do that so that they can replicate what is being done by the Equal Rights Institute wherever they are. So I love their work. I've been a big fan of it for, I don't know, they started it about 8 years ago, and that's about when I first met Josh, was right when they were kind of getting started. So anyway, really good stuff. We talked about everything from kind of the very fundamental basics of how to make the person you're talking with feel more comfortable having an honest dialogue with you, to some of the more sophisticated arguments that people who are pro-choice have. And I think another reason that this is really important is because it's really easy for us to kind of look at the other side, and I struggle with this so much. Like, I'm just going to be totally transparent. I have a hard time looking at people who are pro-choice and kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt. Like, I have a really hard time because abortion is such an egregious issue. Wow, I'm really falling over my words today, but I don't know. This is a tough issue. I mean, you have innocent human beings being killed. I struggle between, the sense of justice that I have like burning within me and wanting to talk honestly about how evil this is, while also trying to take into consideration that other people are at different places in their walk of life, their spiritual lives even. All of us are on a journey in this way, and some of the beliefs that I have now, I didn't always hold, and that's kind of just a part of human life and flourishing. We live, we have experiences, we are challenged intellectually or physically, and our views develop, right? So I need to be better about reminding myself that other people are on a journey too, and they're not. My hope is that they'll come to the same understanding that I have about the dignity of human life. But they may not be there yet. And so maybe it's more my job to help draw them in that direction, or at least challenge them in a charitable way to think that way. But I really struggle with looking at them and saying, this is absolutely ridiculous. This is intellectually dishonest. This is intellectually lazy to hold this position for X, Y, and Z reasons. I think we all struggle with that tendency, especially at a time when we're so polarized. So I think Josh does a really good job of kind of calling attention to these things, talking about how to navigate kind of those differences that we have, and challenging us to be better communicators and more persuasive pro-lifers. So I hope you enjoy this interview. I really enjoyed interviewing Josh. And if you have any questions or would like more details about certain arguments, let me know, and I will definitely hook you up with whatever sort of resources I might know of to help you come to a better understanding of something. And I will link to Equal Rights Institute in the description box, so be sure to check out their work. They're excellent apologists. So thank you for tuning in, and if you like this, please share it, hit subscribe, like it, and make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel. I would really like to grow that more, so if you could make sure that you're subscribed there, that would really help me a lot. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy my interview with Josh Brahm from Equal Rights Institute. Hey Josh, it's so awesome to have you on today. Thanks for coming on to Integrated.
So great to be with you again, Angela. You're awesome. This is going to be fun.
Stop it. Okay. I'm super excited. But there's so many things we could talk about today. But first, before we get anywhere, because I think we're just going to see where this interview goes at this point, tell everyone who's listening a little bit about the Equal Rights Institute and how it got started and what you guys do there.
Yeah, so Equal Rights Institute is, we just turned 8 years old as a nonprofit, and it's a pro-life training organization that I started with my brother 8 years ago because we couldn't find another pro-life group that was doing what we wanted to do. We had a really specific vision for what it should look like when a pro-life and a pro-choice person gets together and talks to each other instead of shouting past each other or calling each other names. And there's just certain ways we wanted to teach that we couldn't do anywhere else. So I like to say that we try to help pro-life people to be less weird is basically the heart of
Don't
ERI.
be weird.
And when I say weird,
DBW.
I mean those people, yes, DBW, that's right. And so those weird is like those people that are like, they mean well, right? But they kind of, they're off-putting. And they get in their own way of persuasion, which is a problem because it's really, really hard to change people's minds anyway about anything, especially things like abortion. And so we started doing we started a pro-life apologetics organization to teach the arguments that we were finding to be working the best on campuses. So we're really all about trying to figure out what is actually working. There are persuasive, good pro-life arguments that just don't change that many minds because of maybe the culture where the other person's coming from, or like there's certain premises or foundational things that you're bringing into it, like maybe religion, that they don't buy into. And so then it's just not very persuasive. And we, our founding staff had like 5,000 conversations on campuses, and we just learned from a lot of mistakes, learned a lot of things that, I used to teach that weren't working that well anymore because people just, Gen Z thinks differently than Gen Y and Gen X. So you just kind of you have to roll with it. And so anyway, so we do speaking and writing and campus outreach and now podcasts and online courses and YouTube videos. We're on TikTok now, which I can't believe I'm saying out loud.
Oh my goodness.
And we're just trying to help pro-life people. We're thinking about practical dialogue tips, just like those nitty-gritty things that you learn when you go through the fire of 5,000 conversations, what works, what doesn't, because you want to try to drop their defenses. They can't hear you if they feel defensive, which most people do in any political conversation. And so you got to try to get their walls down so they can hear you. And we're really intentional with like our body language, what questions we ask, what we don't ask to help get those walls down. We talk about relational apologetics, that art of cultivating friendships with people who are different from you, which is basically what I would like to see the whole pro-life movement doing. So we talk about that. And then we're interested in philosophy. There's kind of a nerd part of this too, where I just want to help the pro-life movement to think better. It's like nails on chalkboard when I see pro-lifers use like super fallacious arguments or being super close-minded. And we just want to help. Let's all the rising tide raises all ships. Just want to help everyone, even the other side, to think better. The more everyone thinks better, the more truth is going to be found in the end. And so anyway, that's a little bit of Equal Rights Institute in a nutshell. And I know Angela because Angela used to work as Students for Life, and I was training their staff, and Angela was one of the 3 best students, if you will, or trainees at a seminar that I did at their office that I will never forget. It was a really, really great time with you guys. But Angela stood out as someone who was just really good at understanding where pro-choice people were coming from and actually relationally connecting with them instead of just arguing with them. So it's really great to be hanging with you again.
Thank you. That was really nice. I love apologetics. That was actually the thing that brought me into the pro-life movement. We had Life Training Institute Mike Spencer. I have never told you this. We had Mike Spencer come to our campus when I was in college, and he did a talk on ProLife Apologetics. I was the president of SCSU for Life. And I just fell in love with it. I love dialogue. I love talking to people about abortion, which is super weird. But yeah, it's sort of, that was what drew me into the pro-life movement. And I knew that I could never leave the pro-life movement. And I've done pretty much everything under the sun since then. But apologetics really remains kind of at the core of what I love. So that's why I've had you on the docket to come on here and talk apologetics, because for that reason. One, because I love it, but of course right now it's very relevant with Roe versus Wade. We're kind of like waiting for it to be overturned in the Dobbs v. Jackson case. So before we talk about kind of what you're anticipating post-Roe, let's talk about maybe some of the more fundamental aspects of relational apologetics and how we connect with people, because you're right, when I see pro-lifers, especially on social media, I always tell people not to argue about abortion on social media, because it's never fruitful. I mean, almost never. It's especially if you're not very well versed in relational apologetics, and you have to be in the right mindset even. And it's so easy to sort of dehumanize the other person on the screen, because it's more anonymous, and you're not looking at their face, you're not feeling their emotions with them, or it's harder to connect. That's been one of the things that's been really hard even, and I think it's been worse the last couple of years. The way that the pandemic was handled really exacerbated this. And I would love to kind of get how you've gauged that too, because I would imagine that's really impacted your work quite a bit. But what are some of the basic things that you can recommend or tell people to do to sort of help break down those barriers so that we can have a productive conversation about abortion?
Wow, that's just like a huge and great question. So like off the top of my head, some of the most important things are everyone needs to be more open-minded, which is like the hardest thing I'll probably say all day today, because almost no one wants to hear that, or they think that they're already open-minded, and usually not as much as they think. It's hard to live a life where you're like, I'm not positive that I'm right about like most of these things that I believe, but it really helps you to connect with other people, because if you're actually open to legitimately changing your mind, if you hear a better argument, an argument that makes more sense, then it makes it feel to the other person like there's a point to this conversation. Because if two closed-minded people are talking, like nothing's changing. It's like we're not doing anything. But when open-minded people come together and talk, great, awesome things can happen. And so we should be open-minded if we want them to be open-minded. I think it's an intellectually virtuous thing. And then part of that, just to make it even harder, but this is, I think, one of the biggest problems in society right now, is we are all so tribalistic, because we have sort of self-separated ourselves. We've sorted ourselves into these different groups.
Which I think is kind of natural, right? Because we want to be protected, right? I mean, there's a natural component to that.
Absolutely.
You know, I don't want anyone to have like their walls go up because they're hearing this and thinking that you're condemning them for doing that. There's a natural component to that. That's
literally everybody does this.
Yes, we do this. This is how people have survived for millennia.
I do this.
I know, I do too, and that's that's like a caveat I want to say. Like, I'm not always the pinnacle of having productive conversations, because I have strong opinions. I'm an opinionated person, and does it always help? No, it doesn't. And I know that doesn't help with changing people's minds usually. So if you're really interested in changing someone's mind, be open-minded, but not so open-minded your brain falls out, like G.K. Chesterton would say, right? But be open to the idea that someone could give you a really challenging argument, right? Because sometimes we don't always have the answers.
It doesn't mean being wishy-washy.
Right.
It's not being wishy-washy. You can be totally opinionated about things.
Yeah.
But are you at least 1% open to the idea that maybe you're wrong about it is the important part of that. No, I think people should have opinions. They should be well-formed opinions. So like I've got a bunch of opinions that I feel strongly about. I've got a bunch of other like thoughts about like political issues that I just haven't earned the right to be confident. And so I just am not confident, and that's okay, because you haven't earned your confidence until you've heard the good arguments from the other side too, and sort of process those and synergize them. But anyway, so with confirmation bias, we're just listening to, conservatives are only listening to Fox News, and people on the left are only listening to MSNBC, and hearing a very, very different version of reality from each other, and we just, it's harder than for us to connect. And so I would like to see if all the pro-lifers that I know that have done this have become so much more effective, where they start paying a little bit more attention to what people who disagree with them say. Doesn't mean that you have to only listen to that. Doesn't mean that you can't have opinions. But like, if you read, like, for example, like I've talked a lot about Tangle, which is this awesome email newsletter that a friend of mine sends. That does a really good job of explaining what both sides of an issue are saying without being a straw manning. And then he'll give his take, and he's somewhat like center left, basically, or left of center. But it's super interesting. Like, that's the kind of thing that's like forces you every day spend 10 minutes paying attention to people who are different from you and see what happens. So those things are just foundationally important. And then we need to stop thinking of pro-choice people as like the enemy or stupid or morally evil just because
that can be
pro-choice.
Really hard, though, Josh. Because some of them are really depraved. I mean, some of them have very depraved views and behaviors, So how, what do you do to do? Because sometimes I roll my eyes a lot because I think some of it is honestly so intellectually dishonest, lazy, or just flat out ridiculous. So, how do you, because there's that, and honestly, there's some of that on our side too, like people who just say things to be, like shock value, things that they haven't really thought much about. But it's easy. I don't know. I really struggle with that. So what do you tell people when that's their gut reaction, when they see some of this stuff?
I think it's a super understandable gut reaction. So I understand, everything that I'm saying is swimming against the current. Mm-hmm. We're talking about swimming against vice here when we say don't be mean to people that tick you off. This is hard. This is why we're not super popular. We're not the most fun people. Some people would just rather, I'm sorry, listen to Ben Shapiro or Matt Walsh talk about how stupid the other side is. They would it's a lot more fun.
Yeah, I was going to say there's an entertainment
maybe not as
value.
helpful for your soul.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's even worse than that. You're right. It is entertaining, but it's also, it makes us feel good.
Yes, and that's the other thing I was going to say. Yes, and I do. I mean, I like Matt Walsh, but I don't take his approach when I go and talk to people about abortion or things like that. I loved his documentary, What is a Woman? He is a major troll, and that is a big part of his draw. And there's something to that. I think we can use not trolling people necessarily to. I think what I like that he does is he takes satire to point to a larger underlying issue, so that you can kind of show how silly something is. Is that maybe the nicest thing? Sure. I don't know. But at some point as a culture, and this is where maybe I can see more of that. Sometimes you do have to point something out and say, this is wrong and it's kind of ridiculous. Especially if somebody's not going to dialogue with you about it, right? But if your stated purpose,
there's a version of that I like even. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think the context matters too. I mean, if your stated purpose is to engage in a conversation with somebody one-on-one, that's a lot different than looking at a cultural issue and saying, this is kind of silly. We shouldn't be doing this right now. This is wrong. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think there's truth to that. So I think Monica Snyder, a secular pro-life, does this really well. I'm snarky in my head, but I'm not publicly super snarky. But I recognize that some people change their mind because of someone snarky on the other side, kind of insulting their side. There are those people. There's a reason Dank Pro-Life Memes does what it does. Oh, yeah. I think Monica walks this line really well, where if you listen, and she's got some speeches that are on YouTube and they're worth watching, because she'll do here's 3 pro-choice myths, and she'll talk about the myths, and in the process, she will get snarky and sarcastic and hilarious, and it's really fun to watch. She gets very ranty, and it's just kind of fun. In the same way, it's fun to watch Jordan Peterson go on a little rant.
Yes.
It's just there's entertainment value to that. But Monica's better, in my opinion, than Matt is at not making you feel like all of the people on the other side are stupid because they're on the other side. And so it's just it's that tricky balance. It's really hard to walk that line. Yeah. And it's understandable that most, I think, probably don't walk it that well. But then the question for me is just always going to be, if I'm for anyone that I spend a lot of time listening to, I subscribe to so many podcasts and things like that. If I'm going to spend all this time, is listening to this person making me more healthy or less healthy?
Mm-hmm.
Is it making me more like Jesus or less like Jesus?
Yes, I was just going to say more virtuous or not.
If you're thinking about that, right, then it's like, yeah, maybe I don't want to spend 2 hours a day listening to that person because, it might just not be the most helpful thing for me to be feeding myself. But lots of different people have very many opinions about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think, we become what we consume, right? In every sense of the word. So spiritually, physically, the type of music we listen to, whatever it is, whatever we're putting into our bodies, it is having an impact on our soul and our physical being. So, so going from there, talking about approaches we can take to establishing a good foundation for having a productive conversation. I mean, it's funny because recently this last year I gave a talk at a church about ProLife Apologetics, and some of the students laughed because I said, if you're really tall, it's a good idea to kind of sit back or sit down on a table, try and get more on their level so you're less intimidating. And they laughed because they had one student there that was like 6'6", a giant. And they all looked at him like, did you hear that? Something that most people wouldn't think about. So what are the things that most people don't think about that they could be doing to bring those barriers down a little bit to sort of kind of make people feel more comfortable?
That's a great question because a lot of it is not real obvious. I think I love the body language example. I think it's something that especially men just don't think about because we haven't lived life as a short female that can get very different kinds of treatment or just have to be more on guard or aware of their safety and stuff like that than guys are. And so sitting on a table makes you so much more relaxed too. It makes the other person relaxed because you're relaxed and not all tense.
You're not at attention,
on the other side.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. There's that too. I think so. There's a few things that we do that I think can be really helpful. So one, be willing to find as much common ground as possible with the other side. And I've been, and you've heard me talk about that before, but there's an extra element that I've been talking about lately, which is, and this doesn't work for everybody, but if you happen to have common ground as sort of on other issues with the person that you're talking with, try to find an organic way to point that out. Because if they realize, so I'll just use me as an example because I know myself the best. There are some views that I have about political issues that conservatives like, and there's some views that I have that people who are either moderate or on the left would be more happy that I have those views. And those are the ones that I love talking about on the college campus because it shows the other person I'm not just buying everything that is in the GOP party platform, or I'm not just going to believe everything that Sean Hannity says or whatever. I'm trying my best to think carefully about all of these issues. And so sometimes I land over here, sometimes I land over here. So no one likes me. No, I make everyone mad. But at least I'm trying to do that. And you can help me change my mind, like that kind of thing. It is so effective. It might be the most effective thing I do on a campus with a pro-choice person is letting them know about some of my more kind of liberal beliefs. And I think another thing that we have talked about that is pretty unique to us as far as I can tell is trying to avoid asking questions that feel like leading questions. We call them arguments that have question marks at the end of them. Because most apologists for decades have taught, try to stay in the driver's seat. Ask a lot of questions because then you control the conversation and that's better for you and they're having to do all the harder work and all of that stuff.
That's a good debate tactic.
And I get that, especially for beginners. It is a very effective debate tactic.
Yep.
If there's podiums in a stage, totally do arguments with question marks. It's really rhetorically effective, which is actually exactly why it's not helpful in a one-on-one dialogue because it makes them feel defensive. If there's anything that you're doing that makes them feel defensive, stop. It's not helping you. It's making everything worse. And so we ask a lot of clarification questions, like with that detective mode thing of, I want to really understand where you're coming from. I'm honoring you as another image bearer, and I want to understand you and not just generally speaking people on your side or whatever. And so I'm going to ask a lot of questions, try to figure out what they mean. But then when I go to counter, I will make an argument back. I will counter at some point. I'm just going to make my argument and say here's what I'm bumping against, and kind of it seems to me like this thing. So That's why I'm not convinced yet. Come back at me. Help me understand like the part of that where I might be getting something wrong. And it's just more transparent. It's authentic. They can tell that you're not, if they feel like you're trying to lead them a certain way or do any rhetorical tricks, they will shut down. Because then it feels like a debate now. And it's just like a different thing. Now we're playing a game. We're playing chess with each other, but it's not like real. I'm not talking to the real you. I'm just talking to some version of you that is trying to win a debate. And so being careful about that, I think, can really help people's dialogues.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I had a couple of thoughts there, and now I'm losing them. But one thing too,
don't you hate that?
Oh, it was such a good one too. But because there's so many things that, like I said, I love apologetics, and I loved working with you guys, and even JFA. You guys have some similar things, you know.
Yeah. Yes.
But one thing too that I noticed working, you know, going to college campuses and doing outreach with all these different people, it was really effective when I could tell somebody that I actually didn't know the answer to their question. Because, too, I think it helps them humanize you.
Good for you.
You know, and being honest and saying, honestly, I don't know the answer to that question. That's a good question. Can we look it up together, or could I get back to you with an answer on that? And give them my email or phone or whatever so we could talk about that if they wanted to. Now, did they really take me up on that? Almost never. But still, at least you could leave the conversation and exactly. But you could leave the conversation and feel like you were heard, and they also walked away feeling that way. There were so many times I had conversations and it was like, that was a great conversation. We didn't necessarily agree, but I could tell like their views were challenged, and they helped me refine my views even, you know, at the same time. So I think that's really important, being humble and being able to laugh at certain things about yourself, or, you know, again, finding common ground that way, kind of having that self-depreciating humor, I think is really effective too. So now that we've talked about some of the basics of building that rapport that's so needed, I don't want to go into all of the basic arguments. I think anyone can go look at Scott Klusendorf's work, or, you know, find some of the low-hanging fruit in terms of argumentation. But what I really want to drill in on, because I think it's the most effective way that we can have a good understanding of where people who are pro-choice are coming from on this issue, is understanding their more nuanced arguments. So in your opinion, what is the most effective, or like the most persuasive argument that somebody who's pro-choice has in supporting abortion, and then, you know, steelman it, and then how would you dismantle it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Because there's so many that come to mind. There's like multiple really interesting.
If you want to talk about multiple, arguments. We have plenty of time. But so go right ahead.
Yeah, I'll do this one relatively quickly. But I'll point people to resources where they can get deep into it if they're interested. But there's actually a sort of a newer pro-choice argument that I don't think we certainly weren't talking about it back at the time that I trained you at Students for Life. But something like 3 or 4 years ago, our philosophy team spent a lot of time thinking about sort of a new category of pro-choice arguments. It's kind of similar to bodily rights arguments, but it's different enough that we think of it as a different category. And it's this idea that abortion needs to be legal because it's functionally like an act of self-defense. Because any pregnancy theoretically could be dangerous. There are women that die from, you know, pregnancies gone awry. Even in first world countries. And so, you know, if we take the right to abortion away, then we're not only infringing on a woman's right to choose or to control what happens inside of her body, but we might be like killing her, because this is a self-defense kind of a thing, and people should all have, of course, the right to self-defense. It's a really interesting argument. And so we spent a lot of time. We've got some really good resources on this. We've got a 30-something minute YouTube video that really gets deep into this. It's on our YouTube channel. I think it's called Abortion as Self-Defense.
I'll put a link in the bio.
We've done a couple of podcasts about it. Yeah, perfect. But also, I'll give you like one of the like early responses you can do. But there's a lot more there if you want to get deeper. But like one problem with this argument is that it's like, sure, any pregnancy could go awry. But it's really, really rare that happens. And when it happens, like pro-life and pro-choice people don't really disagree on this. We all agree that if a woman has a life-threatening pregnancy and if there's no way to save them both, then like no one is trying to get women to commit suicide via pregnancy. Like this is this area of common ground that pro-choice people are always stunned by.
Yeah.
And I'm like surprised. Like you don't know this. Like this is basic.
The
but,
ectopic
anyway.
pregnancy.
So there's
yeah.
that.
Yeah. And it's, and too, depending on the procedure, it's like it wouldn't even be classified as an abortion.
Sure. There's super nerdy philosophical pro-life debates that pro-lifers have about self-injectomy versus methotrexate, but like we don't need to get into that with pro-choice people. Like just like you can intervene. There's nothing. It's like self-defense at this point, and it's really tragic. It's horrible. It's probably a wanted pregnancy.
Yeah, exactly. That's distinguishing factor too, is because we talk about what is it? Double effect. Double effect. Yeah. Duh. So double effect. I mean, the intention isn't to kill the child; it's to save the life of the mother. And so, but like in a true sense, whereas abortion's been justified for health of the mother for virtually any reason, and so not that I was necessarily going to go this route, but like, so if somebody's presenting you this argument, how effective is it to just say, all right, let's say I concede on this point with you. Would you then say that this is the only time that you agree abortion is acceptable, or can we limit it in any other way for any other circumstance, or do you think that all abortion should still remain legal up to birth? Because then it kind of helps clarify whether or not they're using that as just like a whatever, like an argument, like a bad faith argument.
It's a good question. It'll work sometimes. It won't work all the time. And part of that is because there's like 6 subcategory versions of this argument. So it kind of depends on where they're coming from, what is driving them for what will work. But like another quick thing that I can tell them is like, I think a lot of pro-choice people think pregnancy is a lot more dangerous than it actually is.
I'm a survivor 6 times over, Josh. 6 times. I'm like a cat with 9 lives.
Right, apparently. Yeah, it's just like I feel like this doesn't happen as much with I think people who've like after they've had some kids. But like so I was explaining to people, it's like, look, you have like it's like a 0.0017% chance of dying in pregnancy in America.
You're more likely to die in a car accident.
Dangerous country in the world. Oh yeah.
It's like you are
like
way
all
more,
kinds of things that are more dangerous.
And you don't stop driving your car.
And that we treat as not very dangerous. Like there are some forms of like oral surgery that are more dangerous than like a lot of like these like pregnancy related interventions that we might do. But it's safe enough that we just do these things and we help people, and like the risks are just very, very low. And frankly, even in the most dangerous countries to be pregnant, it's not nearly as high as you would think. Ghana is the most dangerous and it's still less than 1%. And so we kind of said, like, there's this interesting question the pro-choice person is implying, which is like, at what point, how dangerous does the pregnancy have to be for her to be able to have an abortion? Yeah. And there'll be this like beard fallacy thing that happens. Like, does it have to be 100? Does it go about 50? What about 49? Like all of this. And my answer to that is I honestly don't know. I'm not sure. It's definitely not 100. If there's a couple of doctors that are like pretty dang confident and they've got good reason to be, then like that, I'm satisfied. But what I know is like, so like if we can't do self-defense killing at like really like barely any risk. If I went around, shooting anyone who might cough on me because I'm afraid of COVID, that would be really ridiculous. Like you've got to be really someone really threatening your life for it to become like moral to use lethal self-defense. And I don't know exactly what percentage my life needs to be in danger, but it's definitely more than 1%. Well, and pregnancy is not as dangerous as 1%.
Right. And I think, too, you have an aggressor in one instance, and another, it's your child is a natural, women have been doing this for millennia. Our bodies are actually physically designed for this. I know sometimes, see, this is where I get snarky because I'm like, it's a bad faith argument. This is the stuff that I like hold in, when I'm having those conversations.
No, I hear you. No, feel free. This is a safe space, Angela, outside of how many people are going to listen to it later.
Like, oh my gosh,
it's a bad faith argument if they don't actually mean it. If they know this is dumb because of statistics, then yes, then it's bad faith, and I have a lot less patience with people who are being intellectually dishonest.
But how often do you feel like you are having conversations with people that are being intellectually honest or are making good faith arguments? Because, you're kind of going back to what we were talking about. I don't know if we were talking about it prior to coming on here and recording because we talked a lot.
At what point did we start recording?
But, I think we are really polarized right now. And so, I'm not going to say that everyone on the pro-life side has really thought through these arguments. For some of them, it's really basic, like it's a human life and it deserves human rights, like the right to life. It's a very basic 10-second apologist.
Or I think the Bible's pro-life, and that's good enough for me.
Right, exactly. But you kind of see the same thing on the pro-choice side. And I was actually doing an interview for like a relevant radio affiliate just the other day. And I kind of talked about this. You have some people who are on the pro-choice side that actually have somewhat sophisticated arguments that they've actually thought about. They're kind of far and few between. And then you see even in that group, you have this other segment of the population that I think is much larger, where they've really kind of heard slogans and they've embraced it as gospel truth. Right. And we kind of have that on our side too, but the ones that have thought about it less are a lot louder.
Yes. I think that's, that's
on both sides.
I think it's an interesting question. I would separate into like two different categories. So like you've got bad faith arguments, which is people that are like, they're saying things they don't really think are true. Maybe they're describing their view as being something that they don't believe, like the kid last year at an outreach I talked to who by the end of this was defending killing 17-year-old kids, mothers being able to kill 17-year-olds.
I've had people
by the end of it, like it's like there's a question.
Rape. I've had people say rape is okay, depending on the culture. That relativism. I was like, I can't talk to you anymore. I don't feel safe. Yeah, it's weird what people are willing to.
So like, if they're, if they're just saying that because they don't want to lose the debate, because they realize that if they like accept the idea of objective moral truth, then they're going to lose, or if they accept that it's wrong to kill a newborn baby, then they're going to lose. Then like that's bad faith arguments. Or they know they're saying something that's not true. We're hearing a lot in the news lately about people who have said a lot of things very publicly that they knew at the time to not be true. And I have so much less patience for that than people who believe things that maybe there wasn't like a lot of good evidence for it, but at least they actually believed it. They were listening to a source. They probably trusted too much. And they just honestly believe something maybe even stupid or silly or whatever. Like, I just feel so different about that. So, like, that's one category. And then another category is people that I hear you talking about that are just making, like, lame arguments. Like, they just haven't thought about this very much.
Yeah.
They might say this bumper sticker slogan in their head, my body, my choice. They might not have ever really thought deeply about it. But they do mean it. It is, like, a real thing for them, some reflection of their view. They're just not being... they're being simplistic.
Yes.
There's a much more interesting version of their view, down deep. And I have different ways I react to both of those. If someone's making a bad faith argument, I have almost no patience for it. I will call them on it once if I really have good evidence they don't believe what they're saying. And after that, I'll just leave. What's the point at this point? They're playing a game, and I'm not here for a game. I'm here to like really talk about truth.
Yeah.
For the people that are just making simplistic arguments, I'm like, look, there's a lot of views that if I got like, someone like, started asking me at some poll table on say like climate change, what exactly should humans be doing about climate change? Like my views are pretty simplistic. And someone who has spent a lot of time reading on this are going to be like, dude, that's like the bottom 1% of thinking on this stuff. I've read 10 papers or 1,000 papers or whatever. Like, I just kind of try to have patience on them because it's not a fair fight. I've been thinking about this since I was 11 years old. Like, it's never a fair fight. And that's okay. I just want to have a real conversation with them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, it's not fair almost. So what are some of the other arguments? I know I heard a really good podcast that you did. I can't remember who it was with, if it was with Emily or somebody else, and you talked about bodily autonomy and this kind of the comparison of, gambling, how like a good argument. So could you talk a little bit more about that in depth? Because I just thought that was such a good analogy between this bodily autonomy, the sense of bodily autonomy and consent to sex is not consent to pregnancy, and then gambling.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we came up with a thought experiment. That was Rachel, but we came up with a thought experiment back when we were working on that like self-defense argument and different versions of it. And at some point, like to respond to certain versions of it, you have to bring in this other pro-life argument that is not original to us. This is called the responsibility objection, which pro-choice people strawman a lot as being something that's supposed to be like puritanical or slut-shaming or something like that. It's not. It has no view on what people should be doing in their relationships. It just says that, as a matter of fact, when people have consensual sex, they're engaging in an act that they know might result in the creation of this like inherently vulnerable child. And now it's here, and therefore they have some kind of responsibility for it because they're the ones that created it and knew that doing this thing might create it. And so when we're thinking about the gambling, there's kind of like, we're wanting to respond to people that they hear that and they're like, well, this is not fair because, women are very biologically disadvantaged in this whole, reproduction process. The guy can just leave if he's a jerk. And like at worst in his mind have to pay child support, but oftentimes that won't even be enforced. Yeah. And she doesn't get to just walk away if this is not what she wanted to have happen. Like, she sucks. Something's going to happen. If her baby doesn't die naturally, then she's either going to carry to term or she's going to have an abortion. And so hearing that kind of like, well, that's not fair thing, how, thinking of abortion as being the thing that's going to balance the scales. You actually hear this a lot in the Supreme Court argument. Yes. This is the direction that Ruth Bader Ginsburg always said that the pro-choice movement should have gone with in Roe. She's like, no, don't make it a privacy thing. Come on. You should have been making about women's equality from the get-go. She knew that was weak. Yes. And so it's annoying. So this is just a little tangent. Go ahead. It has been so annoying how many people have propped up Ruth Bader Ginsburg as like this pro-choice icon, because even though she was pro-choice, she acknowledged that Roe was a very weak ruling. And so I just feel like these people who are pro-choice and are like, oh my gosh, Ruth, we need to do this for Ruth and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you literally don't know what you're talking about. Like, I understand the sentiment and doing this for somebody that you adore or whatever, but like, actually, substantively, you don't know what you're talking about, because she knew that Roe was a very weak decision. Sorry, end tangent. Yeah. It's weird to I agree. It's weird to like defend Roe and be dropping Ginsburg's name on it. Like, she would have been for a very different and maybe even more extremely pro-choice Supreme Court opinion, which is kind of what the other side has been hoping maybe will happen as a result. But yeah, for sure. So this is the direction that they should have gone. So the gambling thing is a way to respond to that. It's like if you imagine. A woman walking into a casino and she goes to play relay. I think relay is the example that I actually don't even remember. It was some game that I didn't even know. Russian roulette, I think. We had to look it up or whatever. Yeah. Russian roulette. No, it's not Russian. Was it Russian roulette? No, not with guns. No. It was like something at a casino, like where you roll the ball and the spinny thing. I don't know. I don't gamble. Yeah, roulette. I used to play I've played blackjack like twice ever. Once on a cruise. And everyone hated me for it because I didn't know what I was doing. It's roulette. Russian roulette is where people do it with like a handgun that has one bullet in it and they're spinning around. It's not Russian roulette. That's okay. That's okay. Hey, consent to Russian roulette. Definitely don't do that. It actually would still apply. Russian roulette, if you consent. This is true. It's still a really bad idea. It's even worse idea. We could extend this there, but I'm not going to go there. You lose a lot more than money. You do. It's really bad. It's a permanent loss. Okay. So she goes to play normal, safe roulette, and she is told that there's like this rule where like basically like the casino's sexist or the game is sexist, but basically women are at a disadvantage. And it's like you can say, I'm putting all my chips on black, for example, and roll the thing. And if you're a woman, you don't get to like no do-overs, no like, oh, I changed my mind. But if you're a man, you do get to do that, or you can change your mind once the ball is landed on the different thing. It's super an unfair rule. But like, yeah, you're right. That's super unfair. But if she still plays it, knowing that, then it's like, what do you want me to do? Just don't play that game. Like, that's like go somewhere else and play a fair game. But that doesn't mean that once, like, because if she does put all of her chips on black and then red comes up, And she's like, I changed my mind. This is not the outcome I want. I consented to play roulette. I did not consent to lose all my money. It's like, sorry, that's how this works.
Yeah.
These two things are completely connected. And so you don't get to change your mind now because you got involved with this thing. Maybe you shouldn't have, but here we are. Mm-hmm. And certainly, so then it's kind of like, and then you can extend it one more level. What if the I don't even remember, what are they called? The casino staff that run the table, that deal the cards, and the dealer.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, they deal the cards.
The dealer says, okay, you can have your money back if you literally kill that guy over there. Mm-hmm. Like, then you can have your money back. It's like, well, of course you can't do that because he's still got a responsibility here, and you can't kill people to get out of those responsibilities.
Yeah, well, and even another step further, kill your child, and you can have your chips back. Mm-hmm. Kill your born child. Mm-hmm. Then you're trotting out the toddler too. But which would be even more egregious, than killing random guy. I mean, that's still awful. But we recognize too inherently, and Francis Beckwith talked about this too in my last interview on this series, is that we understand that there's something different about parenthood and our relationship innately. Like, there's kind of, it's sort of overlooked when we're talking about this, and I know you guys talk about it like guardian de facto, like argumentation. Francis J. Beckwith also talks about this, the scenario of like the woman who gets stuff every once in a while. And if anyone is listening to this now and hasn't listened to that podcast, you need to go back and listen to it because he explains the whole argument.
Clearly.
Yes. But, that's too an important part of this discussion, obviously. But what do you do when somebody's just not willing to acknowledge the natural innate relationship between a mother and her child? Because I think, too, they want to reject that as if it's not relevant to the conversation. And it's kind of this underlying premise that they hold in their views that they don't want to touch or they just completely ignore.
Yeah. That's a really good question. So I don't know if you're going to like my answer or not, but for sure that happens a lot. And it's when I see it happening, I mean, obviously it's sometimes hard to tell if that's the thing that's happening, but if I think it's the thing that if it's part of the difference between me and the person in front of me, I'm not usually likely to make that the thing that I'm going to try to counter next. Especially, as a white cis guy on a college campus, like, trying to explain that you're actually a mother if you're a pregnant survivor of rape, I just don't think it's going to be a very persuasive direction to go. And obviously I want them to understand motherhood and all of that better, but I don't think I'm going to be the one to probably explain that to her. And so that's why when we've thought about bodily rights arguments, whether it's the de facto guardian thing or the thing that we've kind of moved to since then, several years ago, it all works even if you're not talking about a parent-child relationship. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't need to lean on or have some extra power to my argument carried by the fact that it's a mother and her child, because I can say, look, abortion is intentional direct killing. Mm-hmm. You don't get to do that. You don't always have to help people. I will give you that. There are lots of people that you don't have to help, but you don't get to kill people. So the thought experiment that we've been using lately, I think has been really helpful for some of the people we've talked to, and some of our clubs have used this a lot. Have found it to work even better than the de facto guardian direction. Is to talk about when you're pregnant, you have two options. You can help by letting this child live, and use your body for 9 months, or you can kill it or hire someone else to kill it. But that's confusing for pro-choice people sometimes, because in a lot of other situations, you actually have a third option, which is kind of a more neutral don't help option. So, Angela, if you had a kidney problem and you asked me for a kidney donation because somehow you figured out that we're a match, I have three options, right? I can help you by donating my kidney. I could say, I'm sorry, I feel like I need both my kidneys or whatever, and just not help you. Or I could intentionally kill you. Maybe because I'm super codependent and I don't want you to know that this pro-lifer wasn't willing to save her, whatever the reason is. Those are three distinct options. But in pregnancy, you only have two. So pregnancy is more like this story. Imagine you have a boat and you're going to just go out for a pleasure ride, a cruise, whatever, and you're a few hours away from shore, and you discover there's an 8-year-old stranger hiding on your boat. It's this little boy who's pretty dumb. He was playing hide and seek on the docks with his parents and went on a stranger's boat and hid in the closet. It was super effective. He didn't get found. He's the champion. But now here you are with this kid. Exactly. Yeah, it's a hide and seek champion. So you've got two options there. You can help him by going back to shore and helping him find his parents, or at least delivering him to like law enforcement or whatever. Or you can toss him overboard, right? Like those are your options. There's no like neutral don't help option. Now I heard one pro-choice person try to get out of this by saying, well, maybe he could swim to shore. And I'm like, no. You're miles away from shore. This is he's not
my
make
thought
it.
experiment,
sir. He's gonna drown. Like this is not right. Well, it's like no 8-year-old swims to shore 2 miles. Like whatever.
No.
In the ocean. Like I couldn't do that. And so like there's really only two options here, and that's like what pregnancy is. And so the point we're making is, even if sometimes you have to do things, help people in ways that you weren't typically obligated to, if the only other option is to directly kill them, then yeah, you are obligated to help them at least temporarily because you don't get to kill people.
Mm-hmm. So I could see the first thing somebody would say is that, yeah, but you're expecting her to undergo labor and do things that will have a serious impact on her body. So why should a woman be forced to, you're just a forced birther. You don't care about women. So
right.
How do you bring that along? Because obviously that labor is a natural part of, that's how you bring life into the world. And it's so sad to me because it is such a powerful experience when you embrace it and lean into it. Because there's nothing like it. You're bringing another human being, another unique person with a soul into the world. And it's this very powerful experience when you lean into it and you mm-hmm. let it happen. And these women are so resistant to embracing that part of their womanhood. But you can't explain that to somebody because they're just looking at it, and partially because it's always been portrayed as something traumatic. Every TV show, everything, women, the first thing they do when you tell them that you're pregnant is they share their horror stories with you. It's like just this weird thing that women do, and I don't get it.
That'd be so annoying.
It's really frustrating, and it's like you're trying to prepare a woman for labor, and it doesn't actually have to be traumatic. I mean, I've done it 5 times now, and each time it's been different. But my longest labor with my last labor was my longest, but it was actually the most powerful experience for me because it was the first time I actually owned my labor because I was at home having home birth, so it was a totally different experience. The mindset was totally different. And you just think like these women are totally missing it because they're so worried about how much it's going to hurt. So what do you say to the woman who says, but it's my body and it's you're forcing me to undergo something that is going to completely change my body permanently, most likely?
Yeah. I'm going to find a lot of common ground. You're right. I'm not one of those annoying pro-lifers that just thinks that pregnancy is a cakewalk and this is just going to be just like a minor inconvenience to you. You're right. My wife has had 3 kids. There is a permanent effect there, and that's why we talk about like the casino thing. Like mm-hmm. sometimes this might be like, well, I didn't realize this. It would be this, difficult to lose all the money that I just bet on this thing. It's like, mm-hmm. well, then please don't bet the stuff. But when it's like, well, you're forcing me to do this. This is one of the few times where I will butt in and kind of argue with him about language. Because Angela, like I am one of those pro-lifers that's like not, I'm usually like, let's just use neutral terms. Let's not call them pro-abortion. It's okay to say fetus and embryo. Just like use neutral terminology so that when you're making these arguments, they know that you're not like adding rhetorical force by using the word baby instead, but sort of implies value and is kind of question begging. So like, I'm usually the guy that's like, let's stop arguing about language so much. And just like, I can handle making this argument without using those terms. And yet here's the case. It's like, if they call the baby a parasite, yes. I will jump in because it's so overly negative. Or if they call me anti-choice, I will jump in. And this is one of those other kind of rare cases where, and I did this recently with someone that I was emailing back and forth with, who I don't know, read me on Tangle, I think, and was like, how you'd be forcing pregnancy. It was like, I really need to stop you there. I don't think I'm for it. And here's why. If your best friend, your best female friend who's got kids, tells you that she has realized that her life is going to be so much better if she kills her 2-year-old and kind of goes back to the way life was before. And if you're like, no, we can't do that. I'm not going to let you do that. I want to help you, but blah, blah, blah. And then if she responds by saying, so you're forcing me to be a parent?
Yes.
Like, notice what has just happened here.
There's an
it's
underlying
you're not
assumption.
Forcing her to do anything.
Right.
You're just saying, don't kill someone.
Yep.
You can't kill people. I'm not forcing you to be anything. I'm just saying we can't kill people, to change their unless it's like a total self-defense thing, which it's not. And so I will kind of jump and be like, I don't think this is fair terminology. We have a whole article that kind of paints how to do this, that talks about, pro-lifers are not forcing women to be pregnant. We're not forcing anyone to be pregnant. We're just saying it shouldn't be illegal to kill people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction and can be overlooked too, because you can get caught up in the minutia of it and just say, well, no, we're not, but you don't have the intellectual grounding to like bring it back to why. And so I could see a lot of people just throwing their hands up and saying, no, that's ridiculous, but they can't exactly articulate why necessarily, at least not in a charitable way. Yeah. So I think that's really helpful. Yeah. All right. So we are about to see the overturning of Roe versus Wade. What do you plan to do when Roe is overturned?
Yeah, I saw that asked on, I think Secular Pro-Life tweeted that this morning. I was like, I don't even know. So here's what's been hard for me. This is where I start annoying people again. Okay, so I don't like the idea, like some people have gone as far as say, like, there should be no celebrating because it'll be so off-putting.
I'm totally
and then the other extreme is we should be like publicly partying it up and like in your face, pro-abortion movement, like that kind of thing. And I'm opposed to both extremes. Yes, of course we should celebrate. There's so many tens of millions of dollars that has gone in for the last, 40 plus years on trying to get even just to this level. And this isn't even the end. This isn't the finish line. This is a checkpoint, but it's a checkpoint that we've been having to work toward because we couldn't do much else substantively to defend the unborn without this checkpoint happening first. And so, yes, let's celebrate, but I'm encouraging pro-lifers to try to not be obnoxious in the way that they celebrate. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't come across as a in your face, you bunch of losers on the other side, finally we win. It should be like, just keep in mind, pro-choice people are watching. And if you want to have more likelihood of changing their mind or even having them willing to talk to you about this issue, then they're probably not going to if they just see you mocking their side or dropping all kinds of mics. And so I don't know exactly what we're going to do besides, to pull the curtains back. We have a YouTube video that's ready to drop, the moment that it's released. And we were going to be tweeting a lot. Emily will be TikToking all day with angry pro-choice people, like trying to help people think well about it. And like, that's kind of our role. Mm-hmm. And we'll definitely be happy about it. But most of our staff's like not in the same place. So like, we're not going to go and like have dinner or something like this. Like we're all kind of all over the country. We're spread out. And so we will hang out on Zoom like we do every time the Supreme Court is releasing an opinion every 10 minutes. Let's hang out. Let's hang out on Zoom and talk about it and discuss. We're going to read it and try to help pro-life people to understand what it says and what it means and to understand that this is, again, it's not the finish line. The work continues. And if anything, our dialogues with pro-choice people are going to be so much harder this year than they ever have been before. Mm-hmm. Assuming that Dobbs goes the way that we all think it's going to go, it's going to be so hard. And I've been saying this for 6 months. It's like the analogy I usually use here because I like movie references this isn't technically a movie, but one of my favorite TV series of all time is Band of Brothers. Have you seen Band of Brothers?
I haven't. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm going to spoil the first part of it for you. Whatever. It's for those who don't know, Band of Brothers is an amazing HBO series that Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks produced shortly after making Saving Private Ryan. And the entire thing is about this one group of guys. It's totally true story. Like there's almost no exaggeration in it. And it takes place about one of these, this thing called Easy Company, was one of the companies of the first paratroopers, like parachuting out of planes with a rifle and some supplies behind enemy lines that hadn't really been done before. World War II was the first time this happened. So this takes place about Easy Company, and their first day of battle was dropping behind enemy lines on D-Day. That was what was going on for them on their first day, while other people were, on Omaha Beach and all of that. But here's what's interesting. That first day of battle, super dramatic, amazing, all the stuff that happens. That's episode 2. That's not episode 1. The first entire episode is about their boot camp. Like a year or two in this, really sucky camp in Georgia with this really mean kind of drill sergeant guy who would be make them run up and down this 1.5 mile hill multiple times a day and just grueling. And they was this is so hard. And what they didn't realize was that it was actually going to get harder. They needed this training because it was just getting them ready for they were going to end up on the Eastern Front in winter, in snow, without winter gear because of logistics problems and having to survive that for a couple of months. It was going to get so hard, and they needed that boot camp. So here's the point to bring it back. People take boot camp more seriously in wartime than in peacetime. And I think a lot of pro-life people have been complacent about apologetics because they're not like Angela. They are just look, this is a pretty simple issue. Killing is wrong. They're babies. I don't have to do anything other than that. And don't listen to groups like us or Life Training Institute or Justice for All. They're just kind of off the top of their head. And I'm telling you, there are some arguments on the pro-life side that work a lot better than others. Mm-hmm. And if there's any time to learn what those are, this is it. Because our dialogues are going to be harder. Because right in the beginning of this, we're talking about how important it is to lower people's defenses. How do you lower people's defenses when they think that they're literally entering into the first season of Handmaid's Tale? They really think that's going to happen, some of them. And so they're terrified and furious. And both of those emotions are understandable. So it's like talking to an animal that's been backed up into the corner of a trap. That's how they feel. Mm-hmm. That makes rational dialogue about philosophically tough issues harder. And so this is the time to learn those body language tricks and the kinds of questions to avoid asking and stuff, just to give yourself the best chance on this difficult year to still be a really persuasive pro-life advocate.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I remember a few years back, a really good friend of mine asked me, we had just gotten to know each other a little bit. We were headed to a joint meeting at church, and he looked at me and he said, "So you've been doing pro-life work for a long time. He goes, I think I already know the answer, but I'd like to hear it from you. Do you think that women who have had abortions should go to prison?" And I looked at him and I said, I do think that there are some women who do it because they have demonic influence and they genuinely are doing it because they enjoy killing babies. I think we are seeing some more of that, but I think it's really unusual. What is more often the case is that women have bought a lie or they're coerced into having an abortion. And so you'd have to parse that out as well. And I think more often than not, because women are in a state of crisis, they don't understand motherhood. Women haven't been raised to be mothers. They've been raised to have careers in our generation and before and, going forward. Women don't know how to be moms. That's fun. That's a very fundamental issue that we need to address as a society. But these women have been told motherhood is scary, it's wrong, it ruins your life, whatever. Yeah. And so they're terrified. Their frontal lobes are not working. Our frontal lobe is where we have rational thought and we reason. And their brains are operating out of the primitive survival aspects of their brain. Mm-hmm. And so they're not actually able to think intellectually and reason through things. Yeah. That's one of the benefits. I know you guys have a sidewalk counseling component as well at ERI. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really helpful to help women walk through that and pull them out of that survival state into a more rational state. But they can't do that unless their sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system are regulated properly and they feel like they are safe. You have to help women feel like they're safe. And so more often than not, these women who have chosen to have an abortion, they've chosen it because they feel like an animal caught in a trap and they would rather gnaw their leg off than wait for someone to save them. And so I don't think women should be coerced into or put in prison necessarily. Now, are there instances where that maybe should be the case? Sure. Like these women who are actively getting pregnant just to kill their offspring because they find it empowering or whatever. But that's extraordinarily rare. And you can't make laws for the exceptions, right? Like people talk about that all the time. You cannot make law for the exception to the rule. We do things in a general sense. So, kind of with that, you're talking a little bit more about kind of some of the bigger picture things, because obviously the pro-life movement is going to change a lot, I think, personally, when Roe is overturned, because you're right, like this has been the first benchmark that we need to hit in order to eradicate abortion entirely. And some states have trigger laws where abortion will be made illegal right away. But other states like mine, it doesn't change much, or there are some limitations. So how do you think, what do you see happening in the pro-life movement on a national level? I mean, we've talked a little bit about this. I mean, there's a lot that people don't see to the pro-life movement on a national level. And I just think a lot of that is going to be exposed because those benchmarks are no longer present. I don't know. What do you think is going to happen? I don't know. And I also think too, I was just going to add, I do think that the pro-life movement will be infiltrated more to be exposed. And so I do think there are some things that will be exposed because there are weaknesses within the national pro-life movement.
Yeah. I mean, obviously we hope, well, I guess we should say we hope that things that ought to be exposed get exposed, and we hope that, other things don't. Like for sure, every movement has strengths and weaknesses. And the pro-life movement has its fair share of weaknesses. It has its fair share of frankly, leaders who are emotionally unhealthy or making, if not foolish, but even sometimes just immoral choices where the way that they treat people is bad. There's a lot of infighting, and a lot of that is fighting that's not necessary or helpful. And then there's a lot of stuff where people aren't allowed to talk about it in public because it would be seen as disrupting pro-life unity, and then we're not talking about it, we're not thinking better about it. Like both of those are problematic, and so we got to try to find a balance. It'll be really interesting to see, though, what the effect is on, like, national organizations. Like, our organization doesn't change much post-Roe. We're still training people how to dialogue. Like, if anything, it's like the work becomes more important, arguably, but it's not like suddenly all of our arguments are changing. We are certainly, it's changing, like, my priority order on what stuff to upgrade. So we're improving on our bodily rights module in the Equip for Life course and the back alley abortion part of it, because we're hearing those a lot, and we've learned a lot of things that work even better in the last, however, it was 2016 when we first filmed that. And so, like, I'm working on those things like this year for that reason. But some of the other organizations, it'll be interesting to see what happens, exactly what happens with them and how they work. But I'll tell you, the only thing I'm thinking about all year is what a post-Roe America and pro-life movement looks like. And there's so many branches of that, because like every segment of the pro-life movement changes at least a little bit. But I'll tell you something that I'm most passionate about is I want, when Roe is overturned, I want to see the movement less dropping a bunch of mics and like in your face kind of a thing, and more like, what would it look like for us to really publicly, visibly hold a hand out to the women who would want abortions but now can't have them, and actually offer some direct support. Now, some of that already happens at pregnancy centers, which is awesome. We're going to still need that, but I think we need more than that. So, like, for example, here's like an easy low-hanging fruit version of that, is the church. What does it look like for the church to really be in their neighborhoods and really serving the people who are outside the walls of the church? Almost every pastor who plants a church talks about how they care about that in the first year. And then it gets really hard. And a lot of churches have a hard time actually in the end doing that. And so I'm talking to a lot of pastors, trying to figure out, like, the pastors who are doing that well, what does that look like? How can we help other pastors to do that? Because there's going to be a lot of people who could really use some help. And I would like for the church to be doing that. Of course, I would like to see, charities doing that. But here's the more controversial element of it, although not as controversial as I first thought it would be. But certainly some pro-lifers might get a little defensive about this. But I think that we should support government programs that will also offer support to at least single moms, or even reward people for being parents. Like, you want the church to be able to cover all of that.
Yeah. like in Hungary.
And I just think it's going to be some combination.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And so, like, what does that look like? And I don't know exactly what are all the policies that we ought to support. I'm just saying, like, there are some conservatives that have been kind of closed off to every version of that because it sounds like welfare to them. And I don't think it has to be like welfare. I think there's a lot of different versions of this. But I'll tell you, if the pro-life movement got behind stuff like that, got behind government policies that will really directly help these people that, you know, are sort of seen as like the enemy, then I think it's going to help us to be able to connect again and be able to talk more about this thing, because then they'll be able to tell that we don't just care about fetuses, we also care about born people too, and let's show that. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when I interviewed Beth Rahal for my first pro-life episode, Beth, she's like the queen of pro-life resources, because she was the one developing the programs to coordinate these things in a lot of ways for mostly for Students for Life. But I mean, there's no doubt that other organizations have also used this because it was so comprehensive in a way that a lot of organizations just didn't have the resources to put those things together. So, and this is where I would probably fall more in line with a lot of conservatives in saying, like, this stuff does have to happen closer to home. That notion of subsidiarity, that's a big part of Catholic social teaching, but also I think some lines of conservative thought. But you're right. I think it does have to be. We do have to incentivize as a society women having children. I mean, we can't ignore the fact that not every community is going to have the same access to resources that others do, right? So, and that's a huge barrier. So even though I think subsidiarity is more important, we have to be doing more in our own backyards. We have to establish programs and resources for women. I think that's the most important. But there's no doubt in my mind that it's like a both and. It's like, yes, that's a priority, but we also need to do these things to incentivize families and protect families, including their children, and really encourage men to stay involved in the lives of their children, because that's a huge issue right now. And I feel like some people are talking about how much of a problem this is, but there are a lot of people who are just kind of ignoring it for who knows what reasons. I can't figure out why you would ignore that as an issue. Because it's a striking problem that we have right now as a culture, because of the breakdown of the family, because of some of the developments that we've made over the last 60 years when we decided to embrace a completely new vision of human sexuality and try and bring it into society as if it would have no major consequences, And you're right. I'm going to be interested to see what happens to the pro-life movement on a national level. We know some of the same people, my interactions have been more limited over the last last few years, once I kind of stopped doing national pro-life work. But there's a reason why, there's a reason why a lot of people leave the national movement. And so I hope, like you, that some of these things will be addressed. And I'm definitely one that's kind of like, I would rather that stuff come to the light on my own terms than have something really negative bring it out. And so that's something that I think we can hope for moving forward, to hold the pro-life leaders accountable and to really drive this movement forward. How can people connect with you and Equal Rights Institute? What would be your preference?
So if people go to just equalrightsinstitute.com, then there are links to all the things. I mean, we're on all the social media things. Our TikTok has exploded. We've got like 2 million views in like 6 months, and we never are popular anywhere. So follow our TikTok if you want to see some very short, like pro-life apologetics videos. We have 2 online courses that are kind of like, if you want like a really quick, like here's the most important things that we've learned, and we've got a couple of online courses on either pro-life apologetics and dialogue tips, or one on sidewalk counseling that you referenced. You can subscribe to the Equip for Life course podcast, there's the Equip for Life podcast now that started as a course podcast, and then we brought public. We've got a lot of YouTube videos, so if people are into watching the videos, we've got both short videos, like we've got this quick response series that we just did over the last year. It's like answering almost every pro-choice argument in like 4 minutes. Like we just finished like 26 or 27 videos in that series. But then we've got like longer videos, or more even like kind of fun videos. Like my favorite kind of video to make the last like year or two has been these things I call Apologist Reacts, because I really like watching those YouTube videos where it's like some expert on something reacting to like movie and TV scenes. YouTube knows I will watch every video that's ever been made because it feeds me on my home feed every single time. If it's a fighter pilot or a surgeon or whatever, I love hearing about what's accurate or what's not accurate on movies. So I just kind of do the apologetics version of that, where I'll watch scenes from Toy Story or The West Wing or a Marvel movie or whatever and be like, okay, let's just think about this dialogue or debate. What's going well here and what is not going well here? If this was real life, like what are some things maybe we shouldn't emulate that we're seeing here? And then what are some things that are like going really, really well? And so I was doing movies and stuff for a while. And then I've also done some where like there are just some examples on YouTube of actual pro-life and pro-choice people talking to each other.
Yeah.
And so being able to kind of like, okay, let's analyze that. Now I don't analyze like if like a big pro-life group is behind it, as tempting as that might be, let's critically look at this, but just for like other things that kind of outside the pro-life movement, I'll kind of take a look. Let's analyze and see what's working well and what's not working well. And sometimes the pro-lifers are doing great. I'm rooting for the pro-lifers. I want them to do well. I want the pro-choice side to do well too. And then sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So just lots of different things. If you want to start getting into just learning the things that will help you to be more effective at being gracious with pro-choice people and actually changing their minds, then there are all kinds of resources, and you can kind of find all of them at equalrightsinstitute.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on today. It was such a joy to interview you, and I really want to have you on again so I can pick your brain about more things, especially pro-life stuff, but I think it would be interesting to pick your brain about a few other things too. So thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it. I would
love to come back. It's always fun talking to you. Thanks so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of Integrated, please like and subscribe here on YouTube and on your favorite podcasting platform. Integrated with Angela Erickson is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. Check the description box to see how you can connect with me on social media. And maybe prayerfully consider supporting Integrated on Patreon to help offset the costs of production. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to live life integrated.